Seton Lake is located in British Columbia, Canada, and is actually a fjord. A fjord being a body of water that is a narrow inlet, generally similar to a valley that was created by a glacier. Seton Lake isn't exactly small, it's 22 kilometers or 14 miles long, and lies at about 243 meters above sea level. So I suppose the question remains, how did a train wind up in this lake, in Canada, again? Well, let's take a step back to the Pacific Great Eastern Railway, or PGE. The Pacific Great Eastern Railway was a private rail company established in 1912. However, it was acquired by the provisional government in 1918. In 1972, they actually renamed themselves to British Columbia Railway, and then in 1984, they took on a new name, BC Rail. BC Rail is still technically around today, however in 2004 they were leased off to another company, Canadian National Railway. Well, at least it wasn't CPR, because that would be really annoying. But back at the time of this accident, they were still the Pacific Great Eastern Railway, PGE. PGE operated a line of track that is actually still there to the north of Seton Lake. And it was on that track that a particular engine suffered a rather unfortunate fate. Pacific Great Eastern 280 number 53 was pulling a train on January 3rd, 1950. I actually mentioned this type of locomotive recently on my last top 5. This wheel layout is known as a consolidation, and they're actually very good steam locomotives. The 8 driving wheels gave them pretty good tractive effort for their size, and they were used prevalently right up until the end of steam. Ultimately though, it wouldn't matter how good the steam locomotive was that night, because at mile 117 on the track, number 53 ran into a rock slide. Yep, the exact same fate as 694, just in a different body of water. Number 53 slammed into the rocks, derailed, and crashed into the lake. The engineer and fireman on board were both killed. Sources are pretty hazy regarding what happened after that. How much of the train actually went into the lake, whether there was an attempted recovery of the bodies of the men who were killed, and also the men's names. In fact, this is one of the most obscure sunken trains I've ever discussed, because on top of everything else, no one ever saw it again after that. It's still missing. We know it went in, we know where it went in, but no one's ever attempted, to my knowledge, to actually locate it. And the reason for this probably has to do with the lake itself. The Seton Lake, like I said, it's a fjord, but the thing is, it's actually very, very deep. Way deeper than you might expect. The average depth of this lake is 460 meters, or 1,500 feet. So, this isn't exactly a shallow body of water we'd be searching to try to find this locomotive. And I bet the railway probably said the same thing. Once it went in, they didn't have the ability or the tools to effectively search for this thing. It was gone, and it remains gone. And now we have the question of, well, what about if we bring it up? Well, that would be a great thing to talk about if I hadn't had to talk about it 87,000 times before. But to be brutally honest, before we even get to that, we have to discuss finding it in the first place. Nothing I've been able to find points to anyone attempting to search for this locomotive inside the lake. Not with diving equipment, not with an ROV, not even with a magnometer, nothing. So out of all the locomotives I've discussed, this may be one of the most obscure and difficult to find ghost trains, purely on the basis of the limited details we have, as well as the depth of the body of water in question. It's true that that Santa Fe locomotive I talked about last time is still missing, but at least it's in a river, and the Kaw isn't exactly the deepest river in the world outside of flood season. But Seton Lake, like I said, we're talking about 460 meters. This is a deep body of water that we'd be searching in for a locomotive that, well, may not be in great shape. Now, I'm not too worried about rust because A, freshwater, B, it went down in 1950, so it hasn't been down as long as a lot of the locomotives we discussed before. My concern is, if we compare it to 694, this locomotive went in the same way. It slammed into a rock slide. And that means it probably already suffered damage before it even hit the water, let alone the damage it would suffer from falling in, or slamming into the bottom, or anything else that could have happened. Remember, 694, while it is in pretty good shape from a deterioration perspective, like with the rust, it's not really in great shape when it comes to surviving the impact. It's in multiple pieces. Number 53 is probably in a similar situation, and it's also probably much deeper. That means if you did find it, and it miraculously was somehow intact, and then you somehow got to the point of financing bringing it back up, then you'd have to deal with boiler pressure changes. Without getting into too many of the details involving the science behind this, the point is that if you brought it up when it was at a substantial depth, if you somehow financed that hypothetically, and you brought it up when it was hundreds of feet under the surface, it means you'd not only have to bring it up very slowly, but you'd also have to risk the possibility of the boiler bursting because the pressure would change outside of it as it began to surface. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it, but it's one more thing we have to consider whenever you bring it up. And to be honest, it doesn't matter, because we don't know where this thing is. We don't know where number 53 has been for 72 years. So if any Canadians are watching and you have a substantial amount of time and money, and you don't, I understand, it's fine, I don't expect that, but if you do, maybe you feel like searching for a lost engine, because I think, just as a curiosity, it'd be nice to know what became of number 53. So with that, until next time, this is Darkness. I bid you all a fond farewell.